your afternoon home for Kings talk and so much more. The Drive Guys on Sactown Sports.
Before we bring out our next guest, Dan Favale, Drapes, here's the deal. He hosts a podcast called Hardwood Knocks. A couple weeks ago, they had a segment in which they posed questions that all the teams in the West have to answer. I don't know what their question for the Kings was, but what would you say is a question the Kings have to answer between now and the start of the season or this year?
Are we talking roster-wise or just in general?
Any which way.
I would say, knowing the national media, it would be a question about defense.
Yes.
It would be a question about defense. I was just thinking
that. Yeah. Let's find out. Nice enough to join us. NBA reporter for Bleacher Report, as I mentioned, host of the Hardwood Knocks pod, Dan Favale. How are you today, Dan?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Good. So we were just trying to guess, actually, and I apologize, haven't heard it yet, but we know on your pod about a week ago or so, you guys posed questions for each team in the Western Conference, questions that those teams must answer. What was your question for the Kings?
I think me and my co-host might have had separate questions, but we obviously wanted to know what was going to be the deal with the DeMar DeRozan fit. How would that pan out on both sides of the ball?
Mm-hmm. And what do you expect?
And I think offensively they're going to figure it out. I do have some spacing questions with some of their top lineups, but you look at the level of shot creator that DeMar DeRozan is and the ball and body movement that you generate as a Kings offense that just has the bonus in it. I think the improvement of De'Aaron Fox over the past couple of years is big. Keegan Murray's a natural to work off the ball. I have very few concerns about the offense. I think that they needed another outside-in creator, and DeRozan gives them that, even if you would like to have someone who might shoot more threes. Defensively, I know the Kings were better on that end of the floor last year. Some of their top-end lineups to close the season were really good. I tend to be super high on what Keegan Murray has been defensively and what he's going to be defensively. The emergence of Keon Ellis is big. The improvement, De'Aaron Fox felt more malleable, less stiff on that end last year too. And I know that Kings fans have been adamant that Harrison Barnes was not good defensively, and I totally understand that. DeMar DeRozan is not going to be able to even be thrown on the same type of players that Harrison Barnes was, just because of the player archetype, the build that he is. And so I have some questions leading into that, and I'm wondering just how much they've saddled specifically Keon Ellis and Keegan Murray with moving forward.
All right, so some question marks, obviously, and we'll have to see how it plays out. Dan, at its peak, at its ceiling, where do you see the Sacramento Kings at?
I think they're one of those teams that you put in sort of that top four conversation for the West, where it's, could you see them having a lower floor? Absolutely. But when you're talking about the top teams in the Western Conference that are guaranteed to be locks in the top four, I'd probably stop after Denver, Oklahoma City, and Minnesota, and that's with no disrespect to Dallas, Phoenix, Memphis. The list goes on. They feel like at their peak, if everything goes right, if they get good health, if they get a bounce-back year from Kevin Huerter or are able to move him for someone who feels more of a positional need, they're certainly a team that I think can buy for home court advantage in the first round. Dan
Favale is with us from Bleacher Report, host of the Hardwood Knocks pod. Dan, in your opinion, which team in the West is poised to improve the most this season from what they are right now?
That's a great question. I mean, Memphis is the low-hanging fruit just because they were so bad last year amid injuries. I would keep an eye on the San Antonio Spurs. I know some people think they can kind of sneak into the top six. That feels a little ambitious, but they absolutely walloped opponents in the minutes that Victor Wembanyama played with Trey Jones. And you add now Chris Paul to that point guard rotation, who's going to be able to get him the ball in even easier spots, and then just take in, he's another year seasoned relative to NBA experience. That's a team that I think could surprise some people, and I would be shocked if they finished top six, in part because I don't know if they want to, but I think they could win a bunch more games. They were at 22 last year, and I don't think it's wild to think that they're going to get in that 35 to 39 range.
Dan, I know you talked about San Antonio. This is sort of along the same lines. A couple of years ago, Minnesota, OKC, those teams were in the back of the West. Then all of a sudden they made a leap. You said San Antonio can make a leap, obviously not that high, but is there somebody on the back end that we're not thinking of, maybe a New Orleans Pelicans, maybe a Houston Rockets, that could challenge for home court in the Western Conference?
I so badly want the answer to be the New Orleans Pelicans, but between Zion's health and whatever is going on with the center position right now, I don't know that you could pencil them in. You mentioned the Rockets. That's super interesting. They cobbled together basically like a top 5-7 defense. And if they're going to get improvement on the offensive end with Reed Shepherd, and Thompson maybe staying healthy, adding that element, Şengün is going to get better. Can Jalen Green start out better rather than just having his typical post-All-Star streak? They're also a team that's built to make upgrades via trade if they want to. And so that's a team just based off what it accomplished defensively last year, coupled with internal improvement and the addition of Reed Shepherd, that, they wouldn't shock me if we say there's a surprise team in the top 6 that just turns the Western Conference upside down. Houston feels like a good bet.
Dan Favale is with us from Bleacher Report. Full disclosure, I don't think this is going to work, but you're the guest. What do you think of Denver's addition of Russ? How's that going to work out for the Nuggets?
I tend to be with you. The fact that Nikola Jokic wanted him, it intrigues me, but this is, year 7 of wondering, will Russ do more off the ball? Will he set more screens? Maybe Denver's a team to unlock that, but I honestly, I can't envision it. And on top of that, you have Peyton Watson, you have Dario Saric. The spacing can get sort of skimpy if you're planning on having Russ in the second unit with those guys. And if you're planning on playing him a bunch with Jokic, well, whose minutes is that coming at the expense of when you look at your top 5 guys, even if he isn't starting? So Denver's in a precarious position, and Russ feels like a high-risk acquisition that doesn't necessarily have a high-reward outcome.
Hey, Dan, I'm watching the Olympics. I'm watching LeBron do his thing. I'm watching Anthony Davis play elite basketball on both ends of the floor. And, some people are saying, they're looking good. Maybe the Lakers can make a run. Why do you think they haven't had, the 2 stars, sure, they're putting up numbers, but they aren't having team success? What do you think about the Lakers this year and the way AD and LeBron, the synergy they seem to be playing with now?
I think when you look at last year with how much they both played in general and also played together, and then what they're both doing with Team USA, it makes you angry that the Lakers haven't been more aggressive to upgrade the roster. And I don't know what moves via trade were available to them, but to basically do nothing this summer, that's a failure, because you're on LeBron's window and he's still one of the best players in the world. Anthony Davis, the stuff he does on defense is fantastic. As of right now, I wouldn't have the Lakers in my top 8 in the Western Conference. They have 2 top-end guys and a bunch of question marks after that. And to not make improvements off there, I think, is a massive failure on the front office's part.
Kyle mentioned the Olympics, so I got to ask you, Dan, and maybe you don't care. I went on 3-on-3. I went from wondering why it's an Olympic sport to not caring to now I'm really frustrated and embarrassed that, that the U.S. men's 3-on-3 team is so bad. What can we do to fix this? Are you concerned about it at all? Or is this actually an embarrassment for those of us here living in this country where we invented the game of basketball?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is embarrassing. I think it just comes back to, can we get bigger names other than, a Jimmer Fredette involved here? What would it take to want better players to be more consistently involved? And, hey, maybe make it an all-star game event, and then the NBA players will actually care, and you can open it up to them. I don't have a solution, but that might be one way to go.
Yeah, better players is always a good place
to
start.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
Yes.
No doubt about it. Hey, Dan, as we were looking at the Western Conference, the Phoenix Suns, I think – made some underrated moves, man. I like what they've done this offseason, especially when you consider they were pretty much hamstrung, handcuffed. They couldn't do a whole lot. Could the Suns be a dark horse in the West?
They certainly could. I feel like every team you're asking me about, I'm giving you the same answer.
Right.
The talent at the top is undeniable. And I mean, just to get Tyus Jones on a minimum is a home run. They have so many, I would call them just non-wings on this team right now. And I don't know what that looks like if Tyus is going to start, that means no Grayson Allen. And so your wing defender is either Devin Booker or Bradley Beal, and that gets weird. Who are you closing with? And also just Yusuf Nurkic was fine last year, and they have Mason Plumlee right now. Neither of those guys really work in what we've seen with Mike Budenholzer's past defenses. And some people said, well, they play KD at the 5. Will Bobo get minutes? Those are imperfect and probably intermittent solutions, if they're solutions at all. So I still think they have a ways to go, but you just look at the names on this roster offensively and just in terms of guards plus KD, they could certainly do some damage. And look, they were pretty good defensively last year overall, so they certainly could be a dark horse, but I think I trust them less than more stable forces in the West, like the Kings would be there, Dallas would be there, teams like that.
Dan Favale is with us. We look at the Kings roster. We were doing this yesterday, and there's a lot more guards than forwards. And so we're wondering whether the Kings might be able to get something done for Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Jeremy Grant, Kuzma, whomever. My question for you, Dan, is do you think it's likely we see from any teams in the NBA any more significant roster moves between now and the start of the season?
I'll say yes, just because I root for chaos, and it always seems like we get one of those just sort of late summer or, post-August 1st moves. I think we might see more action pick up after we figure out what happens with Lauri Markkanen in Utah. Come August 6th, does he sign the extension? And if he doesn't, what does that mean? So I think we'll get one more. I don't know if it'll be on the level of Lauri Markkanen, but you said a name I think would be a fantastic fit for the Kings. I know some fans want Cam Johnson, but I love the idea of DFS in Sacramento. And with where Brooklyn is right now, it feels like there's the potential for something to get done there.
Yeah, you would think Brooklyn's trying to be sellers here, before the season and auction off some of their pieces. Dan, we talk so much about the West and how difficult it is, no doubt about it. But are we really looking at a season where we wonder who's going to dethrone the Celtics? I mean, are they the team obviously to beat? Yes, but is anybody even in their league right now?
I think I would probably put Oklahoma City in the same tier as the Celtics. They addressed, I think, two of their three biggest needs, where you replace Josh Giddey with an actual shooter, which makes life easier on everybody else on the floor. And then you got some size, a rebounding presence, and some offensive dynamism if you want to play big up front in Isaiah Hartenstein. And if we forget, a lot of the players on this team are just going to get better. They're still built to make a move if they need to go out and get another from-scratch scorer type with a little bit of size. So I have them in Boston's tier, and they're probably the only team I have on the same level, though I keep staring at the Sixers, and I'm amazed at the body of work they did, but the caveat of Joel Embiid's health, I'm just reticent to put them as high.
And who would get Favale's flowers for having the best offseason league-wide to this point?
It's probably between OKC or Philly. Philly just put on a masterclass of what to do with cap space. They spent a ton of money on Paul George, and they have an actual rotation that they were able to fill out, which is big. And I think what OKC did, not just getting Hartenstein, but that Josh Giddey trade was a home run for them. They give up no picks this summer, and they have $1 trillion. And also the deals that I think flew under the radar, declining team options for Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe and getting them on friendly contracts that decline. That's going to make them interesting trade pieces, or if not contributors. And so I would keep my eye on Oklahoma City, not just as a team that can win it all right now, but if there's a gap or a hole they need to fill, they're built to do all sorts of moves, whether they're big or small.
Man, Dan Favale, OKC. Everybody seems to be pushing their chips in on OKC. I know you mentioned Denver earlier. We talked about, Russell Westbrook, but the loss of KCP. Maybe I'm in the minority, Dan. I think Denver's window might have already closed. Am I being too premature with that?
No, I love it, because let's penalize ownership or front offices that are just needlessly cheap. And I understand that they want these younger guys to get run. You had the ability to keep KCP and give more playing time and reps to Christian Brown, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson. And so I think this was a disastrous offseason for them. Nikola Jokic is age 30, and you're trying to bring along these guys that probably won't be ready for another 2 or 3 years. And I think they'll still be a good team, but for you to wonder whether their actual inner circle title contention window is closed, I think it's a fair question.
Check out the Hardwood Knocks pod, and make sure you're following on Twitter and at Bleacher Report Dan Favale for his NBA insight. Thank you, Dan. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your summer. We'll talk to you soon.
You as well. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Take care. When we come back, we'll tell you who NBA general managers say, oh, yeah, this guy's going to be Rookie of the Year. Next on Sactown Sports.
Golf to Go is brought to you